Welcome back to Marvelous Videos. I'm Rylan. Reboots can often be hit or miss. Unfortunately for most, it tends to be the miss, and the 2011 reboot of Thundercats does not stray far from the negative repercussion. What started off as a promising show due to its anime-style animation, stellar soundtrack, dynamic storytelling, and the nostalgia ended up as a drag due to several reasons. Fans did not like some of the changes that the characters went through, which often diluted their importance. Many a time, fan-favorite characters were also ruined by cheesy romance plots that served little to no purpose, and also awkward deaths. In today's video, we'll go over the details of the animated series, discussing its several plot points, and talking about the reason why it was ultimately scrapped. Before we go into our explanation, however, we have just a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is just a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thanks. Now then, let's begin. What was the animated series all about? The 2011 reboot of Thundercats is based on the popular 80s show where humanoid felines escape Thundera after its destruction and set up base in Third Earth. They find enemies in a demon priest known as Mum-Ra, the mutants, and the Lunatics. With the power of the Sword of Omens and the Eye of Thundera, the Thundercats, headed by Lion-O, always emerge victorious. The 2011 reboot presents the same characters as the original. However, the premise and central plot undergoes some alterations. Despite not straying too far from the source, many of the characters are changed to a great extent, and obviously, the animation is way more advanced. While the original show was more episodic in nature, with a moral and heroic standpoint, the reboot took a more dramatic and cinematic approach. The soundtrack, composed by Kevin Cleach, made it more exciting, and the entire show was geared towards being more emotional. The story takes place in Thundera, which is not a planet, but a powerful nation-state on Third Earth. The cats have ruled the planet for generations, leading to the rule of King Claudius, that is, Lion-O's father. While Lion-O was the Prince of Thundera and the heir to the throne, Tigra was Claudius's adopted son. Instead of the planet facing its literal destruction due to its destabilized core, Thundera on Third Earth was attacked by Mum-Ra and his lizard forces. In this series, the lizards replace the mutants, but they bring back the same characters. For example, Slythe appears as the general of the lizard army. In the original series, the cats were way too familiar with technology, but in the reboot, it was believed to be a fantasy. However, with the lizards making that fantasy come true by bringing in technology to attack Thundera, the nation fell and many were enslaved. Ultimately, Lion-O, Tigra, Cheetara, Panthro, Wily Cat, Wily Kit, and Snarf formed their ragtag group of Thundercats, with Lion-O as their lord. They set out to find the Book of Omens, to learn more about Thundera, and to defeat Mum-Ra, instead of protecting Third Earth from Mum-Ra's rule. Naturally, Lion-O wields the Sword of Omens and the Eye of Thundera. The latter is later revealed to be something known as the Power Stone, which Lion-O must collect 3 more of. With the 4 stones, and by uniting every species, they will be able to defeat Mum-Ra, who had been defeated several centuries ago by Lion-O's ancestor Leo, with his exact methods. At the same time, they have to stop Mum-Ra from getting his hands on the stones first, because with the Power Stones in his control, the sorcerer will become invincible. The reboot turns the campy style of the original over its head, and makes it a more immersive experience for the viewers. It was a grand fantasy that focused mostly on world building. It worked out great at first, but could not compensate for the way the characters were kind of butchered. Lion-O was turned into a more flawed character, who had his ups and downs as an inexperienced prince thrown into becoming a leader. It definitely made him more realistic, but the execution was where the viewers had a problem. The story was putting way too much emphasis on Lion-O's point of view, posing a great problem for the show, because after a while, the approach just got boring. After the get-go, Lion-O was presented as a naive character who was the heir to wielding the Sword of Omens and became the next lord of the Thundercats. However, he was more focused on bringing justice to the other species, who suffered and were more oppressed by the more powerful cats. He was also more interested in technology, which Claudius found annoying, making him wish that Lion-O was more like his adopted son, Tigra, who often studied battle strategy with Claudius. Lion-O also met Cheetara in this first episode, making her realize that his empathetic nature made him different from the rest of the royals. After Lion-O attended his ritual, where the Sword of Thundera would decide whether he was worthy of leadership or not, he got a vision from the Eye of Thundera. The vision gave out the upcoming attack by Mum-Ra, but it was not clearly decipherable. Meanwhile, his rivalry with Tigra was established from the very beginning, especially with everyone, except Jaga mainly, believing that Tigra would be the Lord instead of Lion-O. It got worse after Groon returned from a quest to find the Book of Omens. Claudius held a ceremony to celebrate his return, while several cats fought in contests. Tigra beat Lion-O easily in their match, making Lion-O more insecure about himself. Later, he spotted 2 lizards being tortured by the cats and decided to protect them when he learned that the cats were basically abusing their powers. This action did not really work out in his favor, as Thundera was soon attacked by Mum-Ra, an army of lizards equipped with technology, and Groon the Destroyer. Claudius chided his empathy towards the lizards and prevented him from joining the battle against the enemy. However, with the odds against the favor of the cats, Lion-O came through after getting his hands on some of the technology from the lizards, because he was the only one on their side who had an idea about technology. On the other hand, Groon the Destroyer was once a close friend of Panthros, who was trusted by King Claudius, but his ambitions were always too big, and he ended up betraying the cats by siding with Mum-Ra, because he was salty and not gaining more power in the kingdom of Thundera, and so he wanted to get his hands on the Sword of Omens and take over the kingdom. After Claudius assigned him the mission to find the Book of Omens alongside Panthro, instead of making him a general, Groon decided that he was finally done. Somehow, Mum-Ra was able to sense the despair boiling within him and sought him out, prompting him to break the seal that held Mum-Ra. Panthro tried to stop him, but Groon emerged victorious in their last fight. He then banded up with Mum-Ra and the lizards and led their assault on Thundera. Meanwhile, Panthro started off as a character who was always very loyal to King Claudius. He befriended Groon on the battlefield, and the two soon bonded closely with one another. He was always aware of his friend's ambitions, but he never suspected how far it would cause him to fall. The two of them trained young Lion-O and Tigra together, and soon they went off to find the Book of Omens. After being betrayed by Groon during their quest, Panthro seemingly died as the two fought, but in reality, he survived and escaped the desert. He continued with his quest, but ended up as a slave in the City of Dogs. He was later freed by a friend named Dobo, and ran into technology, which was considered to be fantasy in this world of humanoid lions and magical swords. When Groon returned to Thundera, he told Claudius that Panthro was dead, making the king mourn for his late friend. However, following Groon's betrayal, it was soon revealed that Panthro was alive and being held hostage by Mum-Ra. Once again, this turned out to be a bluff, as it was Mum-Ra masquerading as Panthro to get close to King Claudius. As Claudius reached out to save his friend, Mum-Ra killed him in front of Lion-O. Ultimately, Claudius died, thinking that Panthro had killed him. Lion-O, Tigra, and the other cats were later enslaved, with Lion-O and Tigra being held in the same prison cell. However, they were saved by the lizards who Lion-O had helped before, allowing the two royal cats to escape and return to the palace. Over there, they managed to save Jaga and his clerics, an army of super strong Thunderian warriors that Chira was a part of. As the four of them escaped, Jaga got wounded while protecting them. Ultimately, he sacrificed himself against Groon to buy the Thundercats some time to escape and tasked them with finding the Book of Omens. As the Thundercat trio of Lion-O, Tigra, and Chitara escaped, Jaga seemingly died in the second episode, but the third episode revealed that he was being kept alive by Mum-Ra by keeping him captured in a lamp, since the sorcerer needed Jaga's knowledge to get to the Book of Omens. Lion-O's adopted brother Tigra originally hailed from the Lost Tiger clan. Following an epidemic within the clan, his father sought the strength of the ancient spirits of evil to undo the crisis, but the spirits asked for Tigra to be killed as a sacrifice for payment while Tigra was just a cub. His father was unable to fulfill that duty and instead sent off Tigra to a faraway land. As fate would have it, Tigra's hot air balloon flew into the kingdom of Thundera, where King Claudius and his queen mourned their inability to conceive a cub. Tigra's timely arrival made the royals believe that this was an omen, and so Tigra became the adopted prince. He was raised to be the prince, and Tigra loved his mother and his people more than anything. However, after she became pregnant with Lion-O, the royals finally had a biological heir, making Tigra lose his princely treatment, even though he was still loved. Following the death of the queen during childbirth, Tigra grew resentful towards Lion-O for stealing his position as the prince and his mother. However, Tigra was always the favorite child, for being more like the cats wanted a prince to be, unlike Lion-O, who was more focused on his own personal endeavors instead of battle strategy and being Claudius' heir. He also met Chitara at a young age, and she arrived in the kingdom to try her luck at becoming a cleric. He developed a crush on her soon enough, and helped her out when she had not been selected. Eventually, the two developed feelings towards one another, but since Chitara became a cleric, nothing became of those feelings. In the future, a love triangle was formed between the two of them and Lion-O, who took Chitara's platonic and sisterly affection towards him as romantic, making Tigra's rivalry with him even the more bitter. That brings us to Chitara, an ambitious cat who did not have a royal background, but instead arrived in the kingdom to try out in the trials of becoming a cleric. Her super speed made her an eligible candidate, and she met Tigra on the very day of her trial. During the trial itself, she was able to avoid her obstacles with her speed, but when the test required her to show patience, she failed. She was eliminated, but she was also too stubborn to back off. Jaga Jaga insisted her to leave, but she stayed outside for days to come, waiting to prove herself and become a cleric. Around this time, Tigra left her with the Day of Astrid flower, a flower that added a day to her life with each petal she ate. After she camped out for days and finally passed out, Jaga applauded her for showing patience and took her in. She met Lion-O in the first episode after being impressed by his desire to help every species. From the start, she knew that he was different from the others and began to support his views. The two met again when Lion-O and Tigra arrived in the palace to save Jaga, and the clerics and the three of them set out to find the Book of Omens together. Around this time, a love triangle began to form between the three of them, making Tigra become even more jealous. In one episode, Chitara even gave Lion-O a good luck kiss in front of Tigra. However, it was soon revealed that Chitara saw Lion-O as a younger brother. Her heart lay with Tigra, to the point that she had kept the Day of Astrid flower with her after all those years. When Tigra learned of this, the two shared a kiss that Lion-O accidentally saw, making him feel betrayed. During their quest, the Thundercat trio banded with Wily Kit and Wily Cat, who were twins born to a farmer. They lost their father after a twister swept him up to death. Meanwhile, they had learned of Eldara, a city of treasures, so when they saw their mother struggle with the family all by herself, they decided to head out to the lost city to find treasure and, by extension, help out their mother. They arrived in Thundera to learn more about the lost city, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. They were even accused of theft after a man dropped his coin purse when they accidentally bumped into him. Ultimately, they began stealing to survive in the cutthroat city. Wily Kit would play a hypnotizing flute to distract people, while Wily Cat would use that opportunity to steal food and money from people. After the destruction of Thundera, they soon came across Lion-O, Tigra, and Chitara, and soon joined them. The five of them together find themselves having to fight the lizards. However, they got the short end of the stick during the battle and were almost on the verge of death when Panthro arrived in his Thunder Tank and brought them victory. After he met the new Thundercats team, Panthro was very distrustful of Lion-O's abilities as a leader, following the fall of Thundera. He did not want to accept him as the new Lord of the Thundercats, but he ultimately came through after Lion-O managed to prove himself. In the quest, Lion-O was also accompanied by a creature named Snarf. He was less annoying than the original Snarf in the 80s animated series and tended more towards being adorable. However, he still did nag Lion-O from time to time whenever the prince got into something dangerous. The one who posed the biggest threat to them all, however, was not Groon the Destroyer, but the sorcerer himself, Mum-Ra. He was an ancient evil and immortal too. He wished to get his hands on the Book of Omens, and later, the Power Stones, the same as the Thundercats, making him the sworn enemy of the heroes of our story. Long ago, Lion-O's ancestor Leo, the first Lord of the Thundercats, was an ally of Mum-Ra's. Mum-Ra was also the original owner of the Eye of Thundera. However, Mum-Ra's evil nature caused Leo to use the Eye and the Power Stones against the sorcerer, sealing him in the process. Leo also had to band every other species together in this fight against Mum-Ra. Lion-O learns of this from the Book of Omens and heads out to be a part of the quest to get the Power Stones and unite the species in the fight against Mum-Ra. The reboot successfully managed to make Mum-Ra more menacing than his 80s version. Mum-Ra also found an ally in Slythe, the general of the Lizard Army. He offered his servitude to Mum-Ra for power and technology in return, as his race sought revenge against the race of the cats. He used a Trojan horse with his army to launch an attack on Thundera after coming in with Groon after his returns. After completing his mission of taking over Thundera, Slythe continues to hunt down the newly formed Thundercats to get his hands on Lion-O's Sword of Omens for Mum-Ra. During the siege, a soldier named Pumira also fought against the lizards. In the original series, she was a healer and one of the Thunderians who escaped the destruction of her home planet but missed the royal flagship. In this series, however, Pumira fought in the front lines of Thundera's army. However, her lower body was completely crushed after rubble fell upon her during the battle, but she was still alive and persevered. When she saw Lion-O leaving Thundera, she called out to him, Tigra, and Chitara to save her, but they were unable to hear her, and she died in agony. Before her death, she believed that the royals intentionally left her to die, and the rage from this belief caused her soul to be unable to pass because of its newfound hatred. Her rage prompted the Well of Souls to bring her back to life, and it brought forth Mum-Ra's attention. The sorcerer decided to use Pumira's rage to his advantage and turned her into his spy. She later became a gladiatrix in the City of Dogs after she became a slave, but she was saved by Lion-O, who was oblivious to her status as a spy. Later, Pumira became a potential romantic interest for Lion-O, which turned out to be one of the several things the viewers disliked about the Thundercats reboot, alongside Pumira acting as Mum-Ra's spy, even if it was not forever. The other factors that affected the popularity of this series were Wily Kit and Wily Cat doing less to move the plot forward and more to waste time. Panthro became a plot device, Chitara being used as an object to deepen Lion-O's rivalry with Tigra, and Tigra being weirdly good at technology despite despite hating it during the start of the show, but that's just some of the other things that do not make much sense throughout the show. However, the 2011 reboot is definitely darker than the original, as stated by producer Michael Jelinek. The animation is a lot more fluid in motion. However, many critics, such as Variety's Brian Lowry, felt that the show was nothing more than a marketing plot to sell the new toy line for Thundercats. Unfortunately, the toy line went to have poor sales, which became one of the major reasons for the cancellation of the series after its first season, even though much of the upcoming storyline had already been mapped out. Maybe Brian Lowry's theory was true after all.
I'm just getting started.
What happened to this animated series? The show had various faults, which we have already discussed. If the reboot was not a reboot at all, and instead was a series that was being aired for the first time, maybe the show would have received better feedback, since it does have an impactful storyline with great storytelling. However, since people already had established opinions around certain characters, and much of the viewer base comprised of older fans who wanted to revive their nostalgia, the reboot series turned out to be a drag. Within a younger viewer base, the show was not much appealing due to the popularity of anime like Beyblade, Yu-Gi-Oh, or Naruto at the time. The show also had poor ratings, poor toy sales, and lots of online backlashes. The people who did like it were not dedicated enough to defend it against those who disliked it. Cartoon Network also gave the show an inconvenient time slot, which greatly affected its popularity. The one thing that stands out the most in the show would be its fluctuating quality and inconsistency. While the first 2 episodes were great, many of the later episodes were flat out bad. Old Friends, the 5th episode, is not a personal favorite. The plotline with the Elephant Village was not half bad, especially with the Spirit Stone being a part of the play, but the whole fiasco of Pumaira's allegiance in the City of Dogs arc did the show no good. Characters such as Bengali and Linkso were practically butchered. While the latter was killed by Slythe, the former was retconned into becoming Chitara and Tigra's love child. Long story short, the show tried to piggyback off the nostalgic elements and a better presentation instead of actually developing the characters and creating a consistent storyline. What would have happened throughout the rest of the series if it had continued? The thing is, the rest of the storyline for the show had been more or less mapped out, which basically reveals that the show was not supposed to be cancelled abruptly. Even today, several fans wish to witness the events that would have gone down had the series continued. In a podcast interview, art director Dan Norton spoke on the storyline that had been developed, stating that season 2 would kick off with a time skip. The show would look into the future where the power balance on Third Earth leans more towards Mum-Ra, who obviously becomes a tyrannical ruler. He threatens to kill all those who oppose him or does not side with him. Meanwhile, the ones against him are far too many, and they find their solace in New Thundera, a place where people support Lion-O and uphold the Code of Thundera. Things would get more complicated around here, as many of the species siding with Lion-O had previously been oppressed by the cats. For them, this is a case of choosing the lesser evil, even though Lion-O is far from being evil himself. However, having been born with a silver spoon in his mouth while being part of the dominant race would result in Lion-O overlooking the others in New Thundera. The writers had also planned out a possible redemption arc for Pumaira, especially with her and Lion-O confessing that they saw greatness in one another. A potential romance made this plot point more likely. However, her thirst for vengeance would triumph over the generosity shown towards her by Lion-O. She would later be turned into a mutant insect by Mum-Ra and the black mist from his pyramid. Ultimately, her desire to kill Lion-O would cause Tigra to intervene and kill her, because Lion-O was willing to die by her hands instead of killing her. In such a situation, Tigra had to save his brother, because despite their rivalry, they still love each other. Tigra taking such a drastic action would once again deepen the rift between these brothers, who have always possessed clashing ideologies, furthering the tensions within the royal family. Lion-O would ultimately return to the Book of Omens to train more and stay MIA for 10 years. During this time, Tigra and Chitara would take over as de facto leaders, and even have a son named Bengali in New Thundera. After 10 years, Lion-O would return, stronger than before, to fight in the final battle. Groon would be defeated in the astral plane. Panthro would get his arms back, which he had previously sacrificed during a fight against Groon. Wily Kit would become the queen of the elephants, while Wily Cat would become the king of thieves. With everyone united, a rebellion against Mum-Ra would be staged, but Tigra would die in the end, in an attempt to save Lion-O from being stabbed by Mum-Ra's sword of Plundar. But this is where things get extremely weird. Lion-O would become the king of Thundera, with Wily Kit as his queen. To be fair, they are not related in any way, shape, or form in this story. However, viewers are accustomed to seeing Lion-O as the grown-up lord of the Thundercats, with the Thunder Kittens as, well, kittens.
No!
Thundercats deserves another chance. Following the failure of the reboot, another attempt was made to bring Thundercats back with Thundercats Roar, but even that became the subject of negative reviews, making the future of the franchise bleak. But a lot of things did work out for the rebooted series, and now that the creators know what went right, and more importantly what went wrong, it should be possible to craft a series that ticks most of the boxes and will please the viewers, especially because we never really got the proper ending for either of the series. A consistent storyline with better character development would have made the 2011 reboot a lot better, because it already had a good soundtrack, storytelling, and world building locked on. Marvelous verdict. A wide range of opinions revolve around the 2011 reboot of Thundercats, with some hating it, some loving it, and others being more neutral. However, not everything needs to have a remake. Not everything has to be fixed. Older cartoons can stand on their own without getting a future remake with the help of modern technology. Sometimes it's better to just move on and let iconic stories be, because no matter how good a reboot is, there are always going to be some things that people dislike about it, and that's completely fair, because the original makes us expect things that cannot be remade. And with that, today's video comes to an end. Tell us, what did you think about the 2011 Thundercats reboot? If you liked our content, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Until next time, have a good one and be safe.